Now, let us continue on and uncover how real estate corporates are deploying solutions and strategies across their business. To discuss this and more, I call upon Peter Clark, Managing Partner and Founder at REdimension Capital, who moderate this session. And he will be in discussion with Mark Fairweather, if I could call you back to the stage, Mark, Managing Director, South Africa at MRI Software, Michael Clampett, Asset and Property Management Executive at Attacq, Laurence Rapp, CEO at Vukile Property Fund, Myles Kritzinger, Interim CEO, CFO at Transcend Residential Property Fund, Ltd, Amelia Beattie, CEO at Liberty 2 Degrees, and Craig Hean, Managing Director of Advisory and Transaction Services at CBRE Excellerate. Please help me with a round of applause for our panel.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, and thanks to all the panelists for joining me. So we don't have a lot of time, and I think we've got a very interesting topic. So I'm just going to do some brief introductions, and then we'll get straight into it. So starting on my right, Mark, as the MD of MRI, so brings a good kind of perspective to the software side of the business. Then we've got Mike Clampett as the Asset and Property Management Executive at Attacq, so good insights from the REIT community, as well as Laurence Rapp, CEO of Vukile Property Fund, which is a retail-focused REIT, both in South Africa and in Spain. And then Myles, who's the CEO of Transcend Property Fund, which is a residential-focused REIT. And then Amelia Beattie, CEO of Liberty 2 Degrees, which is a retail-focused, but also some office REIT in South Africa. And they actually own part of this building, if I'm not mistaken. And then Craig Hean, who's the MD of Advisory and Transaction Services at CBRE. So maybe just to start to set the scene a little bit. So globally, real estate has been very slow to adopt tech, and I think that's pretty well understood, notwithstanding the fact that it's the single largest asset class and the single largest carbon emitter. And we could paint a number of reasons why that might be the case, and I think some of the most prominent ones are the fact that it's such a fragmented industry with all asset owners owning different buildings, and therefore they haven't really had the scale internally to create solutions for their own buildings, nor has it been part of their core skills and expertise to be able to develop that out. But increasingly, what we're seeing is a significant amount of adoption and traction as real estate corporates start to understand the benefits of technology. And I think that's where we'd like to keep the conversation, it's not just tech for tech's sake, and sometimes the word Proptech can sound a little bit gimmicky, but it's really what are the positive benefits that tech can bring in terms of increased or improved user experience, or what is the productivity of your asset, how can you save on costs, how can you transact on assets easier, how can it provide better security for your tenants and their consumers, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of positive benefits that tech really brings. And I suppose that brings me to the first question, which I'm going to start off with the REITs to ask them, is how is tech being used in your business already? And can you give us some examples of that? And then maybe following from that, is it a specific strategy that you focused on, or is it just something that's happened? So maybe I'll jump to Mike as the first, the REIT guy on my right.
Thanks, Pete. Good to be here today. So do we use technology? Let me maybe start off my answer by referring to another company in retail. There's a lot of talk about Massmart and their travails over the last few years. But I mean, I grew up with my dad having a macro card. So, I mean, that's quite a few years ago. And so certainly a retailer like that had access to customer data. They understood their customer 30 years ago. You know, I came to an insight quite quickly starting my journey in property that as a landlord, you actually have no relationship with the customer. There are physical people moving through our properties, but we don't understand a lot about them. We don't know who they are. We don't necessarily need to know who they are, but we don't understand their behaviors, their needs, etc. And certainly I think within the property industry, specifically on retail, and it's good to have Laurence and Amelia here with us today. But specifically on retail, I think there's been a big focus publicly on customer experience. And a lot of us have come out and made our sort of statements around what we want to do with customer experience. And it's really difficult to do that if you do not have a digital relationship with that customer. So I think our journey started in 2015 using Wi-Fi technology, understanding shopper behaviors within our premises, sharing that information with our retail clients, you know, helping them change shop designs, layouts, maybe the time their staff spent at critical points in their business, like the till. And that was sort of the start for us. And I think we've progressed, you know, using other types of avenues to try and uncover a bit more about the consumer and their behaviors.
Fantastic. Laurence?
Peter, thank you. Michael, absolutely. It's exactly the same idea, you know, of saying that as a retail-focused REIT, what we believe is absolutely critical is to understand the shopper. Who's coming into the mall, what do they want, where have they come from, where are they going. And we've really adopted this, so it's not only using Wi-Fi, which gives us a certain pattern of behavior in the mall, but we, a few years ago, bought a stake in a company called Fetch Analytics, which does geolocation data. So we can track the journey of the customers outside of the mall, into the mall, and where they go thereafter. So what we're now doing is sort of building a platform that integrates out-of-mall data with in-mall data, and that now forms part of our asset management strategy overall. So that will drive not only promotion and marketing strategies, but leasing strategies, tenant engagement, etc. And ultimately for us, it's about using that data to provide to our tenants to become a better property partner. Because the maxim we're driving in the business is customers drive value. And the better we know and understand our customers, the better our tenants are going to do, the better we're going to do, the greater the value is going to be for our shareholders. So really, value for us all starts with the customer and how well we know and understand them.
Yeah, Pete, I suppose we haven't really had the luxury of being around for 30 years. I think as an institutional asset class, we've effectively only been really present for about 10 or so years. So, you know, residential is quite unique in the sense that it's obviously extremely high touch. So I think quite dissimilar to a few of the other property subsets, you know, we're dealing with individual month-to-month leases on each of our units. In our business alone, you know, we hold close to about 5,000 odd leases with fairly significant churn on a monthly basis. So the systems and the operational side of it that sits behind that and that framework or skeleton is obviously critical to how the business operates at the end of the day. But I think to Laurence's point, you know, where it all stems from is strategically understanding the tenant base and how you fit into those demands or requirements as a business is obviously critical. So, you know, looking at information or data available these days, asking the right questions of that data is obviously key, and understanding those tenant demands. And I think, you know, looking at more recent trends or dynamics in the market, you look at load shedding, you look at continuity of utility, you look at the last 3 years in terms of COVID as well, work from home philosophies and effectively our tenant base migrating back to their units or to their homes. And again, from a tech perspective, what we've had to then incorporate into our properties has been fairly key. But I think when it comes to our company, it is as broad as being inherent to the total company on a strategic level. There are ESG requirements and considerations as well, which we can obviously delve into a little bit later as well.
Thanks, Pete. Good morning, everyone. Earlier, someone was saying to me, I didn't know you know anything about Proptech. Aren't you a bit old? And when Mark was talking earlier, I was reminded that in the early 2000s, when it was still MRI before MDNA, I was the super user for MRI in South Africa, so maybe I am old. At Liberty 2 Degrees, technology and the strategy around it is key to our business. Technology on its own, data on its own, doesn't really mean much. We have 6 strategic value drivers, and for all of them, it gets underpinned by our technology strategy, our digital strategy. It supports that. So in terms of our tenant experience, we have just recently piloted the Mallcom application at Eastgate. See, Mike is here, he's been doing that for us. And that is really to connect in a different way with our tenants and improving the experience that we have with them. From a customer experience point of view, I think Laurence has spoken about that. I am really needing to understand what customers do. I'm obsessed with understanding why they do the things that they do. So combining the technology and the information that we get from that with their behavior really helps us to give them the best experience that we possibly can. We have cameras for that, we've got foot count systems, We've got Admit that opens and closes the boom when you come into park. All those things that makes for a more seamless customer experience. So those are really important for us. And then in terms of what we call safe spaces, this is probably where technology are very, very key for us in that it helps with our security. It's really a key component of putting our security at a world-class level and making sure that we keep our customers safe and our tenants and our people, and that's our primary objective. And as also been said around ESG and green initiatives, technology is key for us in tracking what we need to do to be able to manage our net zero strategy.
So I think we can see there's a lot of tech behind a lot of these REITs already, but a lot of blue sky still, and a lot of interesting things that they can still adopt. Maybe to take a slightly different perspective, Craig, if you can, as a service provider to the REIT community and to real estate landlords, how do you use tech in your business to service your clients, being the landlords and the asset owners?
Okay, so our clients are both the landlord and the occupiers of space, and I think the important thing for us in the services game is that we certainly can't use tech for tech's sake. It really has to be a value-add proposition to our clients, whether they're the landlords or the occupiers. So I think the world of tech in real estate services is not new. People have been using it to market and sell space, and I'll perhaps talk a bit more about that just now. But where we really see a direction of travel and where we're focusing on in our business is helping our clients manage big data that they perhaps don't know how to manage or don't have the insights or don't have the knowledge to actually produce insights from that data. The other thing that we're doing is we've developed systems and I know that there might be an interesting debate on whether you buy, rent, sell, but essentially what we've done is we've put together a jigsaw puzzle of sort of off-the-shelf systems. And it's allowed us to do two things for our clients. It's allowed us to make them more efficient in some of their business processing, particularly in how they manage their monthly rental transactions and actually their transactions. We, at any one point in time, on behalf of our clients, we're managing 600 to 800 transactions a month. We need technology to be able to do that. So it's business processing and then also taking them on the data journey, as we call it. You know, the data is easy to produce. Our clients have lots of data. They don't know what to do with it. So the first thing we do is we use our technology to produce information. We usually do that by taking the data and putting it in pictures, which in itself is quite cool to see. But then overlaying our market intelligence actually starts allowing us to offer our clients insights, which inform strategy. And with the sheer volumes of data that we're dealing with on a daily, monthly basis, we would be lost without technology and its use.
So I think data is an interesting thing which we're going to come on to, but maybe before we get there, it's just around the adoption, because as you said, it's not tech for tech's sake, and there's a lot of interesting tech out there, but getting the adoption journey is somewhat more of a challenge perhaps for big institutions and everyone else to really get that kind of culture of innovation and DNA inside their organization. So Mark, as the kind of software guy here, what can you tell us about the journey and how have you seen your kind of sales cycle with REITs or other asset owners and their willingness to adopt new technology, kind of innovation that's coming through?
Yeah, it's interesting, Pete. I think, 4 or 5 years ago, it was very different to where we are today. And just listening to everyone speak about, one, the volumes of data and the diversity of data, right? You can get really overloaded really quickly with different sets of data, and everyone's tracking different things. And I think a couple of things have happened. Like I mentioned earlier, we've kind of had this scenario of events here in South Africa where, we've been through the storms, literally. And all of us are expected to do more and more with less people, right? Less human resources. And the way to do that is through using tech, right? And I think that combined with the understanding and seeing how things like AI and machine learning can start to help inform decisions, predict trends, and turn all these volumes of data into actual information that you can make decisions off of in your businesses, that's really started to change for us. So we've seen that start to increase dramatically. I think it's also just people being more comfortable with it, right? You open Google Maps in the morning, and if you use Google Maps every Monday morning to go somewhere, it knows that, it predicts that as your first place you want to go. So you see it more and more in your everyday life. Uber kind of knows where you want to go. Your Spotify playlist is telling you exactly what you should be listening to based on where you're at. And the more and more sort of mainstream that all becomes, the more you can see the impact that will have in your business as well. And so that, I think, we're glad to see it increasing pretty quickly.
That's fantastic. And maybe it'll be interesting to hear from some of the REITs as to how that priority has evolved at a board level, if it's something that is discussed, technology, adoption, because the tone is really set from the top down. And is there that tone within your organizations and the key focus on technology? And I suppose you can speak specifically around your companies, and maybe we got an unfair representation of a bit of believers here. But how do you think that is across the rest of the industry? And do you think there is really kind of that buy-in and adoption yet from the top down to utilize tech as an enabler within your businesses? Go, Laurence. Yep.
Thanks. Peter, I think real estate, and I'm going to talk retail specifically, but I think it applies to all of the subsectors, is really at a very interesting stage in its evolution. The question one often gets is, well, what about online retail? How is that going to affect your business? And I think that was probably the question of 2 and 3 years ago. I think today everyone's accepted that omni-channel is the way to go, which means that as owners of physical assets, we've got to start finding ways to incorporate technology into what we do. So certainly, I feel that the industry is moving towards more of what I call an operating asset class, as opposed to the rent collection. In other words, we're all going to have to start running our businesses end to end, looking at the whole value chain. And I think that sort of is, for me, a very exciting evolution as to what the industry holds in store for us, is how do we do that? So, you posed the question around innovation. I think what we've been trying to do is really inculcate a culture of innovation in the business. So we've taken our teams here and in Spain through sort of innovation immersion labs, encouraging people how to think in an innovative way, how to collaborate, how to come up with ideas, how to formulate them, how to pitch them, how to run them, and if they're not working, how to kill them. I think that's what's very important. If they're not working, stop and start again. So really, I think the adoption of technology and innovation is essential for the future of real estate going forward. And certainly one of our key drivers now is how we build that into the value system, the culture of all of our people.
Pete, maybe from our perspective, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's obviously inherent to every aspect of your business. And I know that when we look at it typically, as mentioned, it pretty much stems around business process a lot of the time. But I think when considering, again, to Laurence's point, innovation and improvement, because I think that's what we're all looking to do, is to optimize, improve, deliver a better service and a better business at the end of the day. And tech and innovation definitely go hand in hand. So when we look at it from a top level, it's definitely a key point of focus that we obviously give our attention to. I think previously, when in the past, it used to be a conversation of, have we got a business continuity plan? Or our database is backed up? And I think that's pretty much where the conversation ended. That was the full extent of your IT policy. But I definitely think now every component and aspect of your business has to deal with it. And if you don't get up the curve on that, it's just advancing so quickly, you'll get left behind.
Yeah, I think it is so important to make sure that it becomes part of your integrated thinking, integrated technology, integrated sustainability, and it's not something that sits on the side. We now all look at bringing on board members with that expertise, because ultimately it is the responsibility of the board to make sure that the data, digital and IT strategy are in place. You have to have those resources on your executive. We've got our own CIO, Pat, he's also here. And there's two things for me in terms of adoption, because often you find that if you make it an IT thing, then the business won't adopt it. You need to make sure that it gets adopted by the business people. And those two things are what's in it for me, or with them, as some of us calls it. If you can't explain to people what the benefit are going to be for them, they will never adopt it. And the second one is to create some form of FOMO, the fear of missing out. Once people see that if they don't have that or can't use that, they can't be so efficient, they can't do things as great as their colleagues do, that's where they're going to adapt it. So those are just two practical things for adoption.
Pete, if you allow me, maybe just to offer a contrarian view to that. So I think in our business, definitely thematically a lot of the same, a lot of attention at the top, and also a lot of need all of a sudden from our board, you know, to adopt. But I can tell you, as the person charged with the digital strategy at Attacq, I own the scars now. It's really easy to talk about a lot of these things, but if you look at our businesses, we've built up technology stacks over 5 or 10 years' time. You know, we use this property management software, and then in 2015 there was this nice tool, and we adopted it. And in 2017 we adopted another tool because that could measure carbon emissions, etc. And so what you have in an organization now is this organized setup when it comes to these technologies, and sometimes that is the barrier, because it's not easy to then adopt something else or create change really quickly, because you need to put your own organization through a lot of pain. I mean, I need to come to Mark and say, do I rip out what I've got and replace it with you? I mean, that's like super painful for an organization to go through. And I think in that, it's not just the willingness, but sometimes it's actually the situation we find ourselves in that creates those barriers to moving quicker on the technology side.
Yeah. If I can maybe just add to that as well, Pete, I think looking at the future state, right, instead of, we often operate in firefighting mode where it's just, I need a solution for this right now, I need a solution for this right now. But looking at the longer term kind of roadmap of where do you want to be in 5 years' time, and I think the people aspect is absolutely critical. If you don't have people who are willing and wanting to change, it doesn't matter what you put down on the roadmap, you're never going to get there. But yeah, I think where we see a change is that more and more people in the industry are looking at where do they want to get to, and what does that look like, and what does that blueprint look like. Yeah.
Can I just come in? I mean, I don't think it's about adoption of Proptech. It's about the adoption of the solution Proptech offers. And that's why it has to be practical. There's a plethora of ideas out there. A lot of them are good. But if there's not a practical solution or value add or tangible benefit at the end of it, it won't be adopted. And that's got to be the key focus of either how you use it or what Proptech you bring into your business.
Well, I think that's a good bit of advice for everyone in all the Proptechs in the audience, that there is the willingness to adopt. We've heard it from the REITs, but you got to solve a solution. It's not just Proptech for Proptech's sake. It's got to be outcomes focused, which is really what the key message is here. So maybe to go into the data point, which we spoke about earlier, because with all this kind of tech and everything that's going out there, we can get reams and reams and reams of data thrown back at us. But it's really only valuable to the extent that you can process it and you can make decisions about it, you can do leases on it, or you can operate your business effectively and make better and more informed decisions. So how do you now go about that, saying, okay, well, we've got a lot of tech, we're getting a lot of data, but how do we translate this into key business outcomes? Any examples from any of the audience of how you actually deal with this and what you think about data?
I can kick off. I mean, that's kind of what we do, and that's important. I mean, one of my colleagues who's sitting in the audience told me the other day that on an annual basis, we're collecting 170 million smart meter readings, 170 million data points on an annual basis. That in itself is pointless or useless. But the way that we assimilate that data and the way we use it to kind of demonstrate trends and then overlay insights that we have, because we're experts in the space, to start actually producing insights that in that instance are practically helping our clients optimize their electricity consumption and ultimately reduce how much they're using. That's the kind of thing that's the magic sauce, I think. I mean, producing the data is probably the easy part.
Yeah, I mean, I can also add to that. I think, turning that, it doesn't have to be rocket science, right? There's so many reams of data out there. I think some of the small things we try and do is, knowing where users are navigating in the system on a Monday morning, which reports they're pulling. Use that information to actually start presenting those options to them first thing when they log in on a Monday morning, because that's what they typically do. I think on the metering side, pulling all these data points is wonderful, but as soon as the meter sees the water's running at 10 times what it usually does, you've probably got a leak, alert the user, alert the people. You can actually turn it into very meaningful information quite quickly if you use it properly.
Yeah. Peter, I think for me there are two words that I drive my team mad with all the time, and that is so what. And I see one of my colleagues is here and she's nodding. So you got all this data. Well, so what? What am I doing with it? Okay, and I think it's for management to keep asking that question until you finally pull it down to what is the business issue that I'm trying to get insights on or trying to solve. Because, again, a lot of people can get caught up in the Proptech name, in the valuations and the excitement. But ultimately, is this making my business better? And for that, how do I take all of this data? So really what we keep doing is pushing down, and we've had to bring on skills. We've really brought in actuarial skills to work on the data. There's so much data points, so many data points rather. And it's to sort of constantly be refining that, but saying what business problem am I solving, and making sure that the business owners, in our case the asset managers, are fully embracing what the data can do for them to make their centers better. Unless they're buying that and you've got that link, it becomes very difficult. So it's really saying, bring it down to a simple business decision. The fact that there's data, that's an enabler. So what are you doing with it? What does it inform? That's the key question.
Yeah, I want to just join Laurence there. I think for me, personally, it's got to have a bias to an action rather than a report. I think a lot of the data that we've gathered over the last few years ends up in weekly, monthly, you've got a nice dashboard, you've got an online portal login, I can promise you our ops managers don't go check those portals, but we've got access to the data. And so we're actually on a journey now of reducing our people's exposure to some data, because we're saying, we're seeing that you obtain all these reports, there's no action linked to them. So let's just take it out of your lives, reduce the noise around it, and only use data points that have got clear actions. Maybe just by way of example, we developed a leasing tool with a South African financial institution, and basically what we do is it's their data, it's anonymized, we don't see anything beyond the side of the wall, but we understand very clearly, and we started this at Mall of Africa, we're going to roll it out to other assets. We understand clearly when we segment people that spend money there, so based on credit and debit card data from that bank, where they spend money outside of the mall. And so now, from a leasing perspective, instead of having a couple of guys sitting in a boardroom arguing whether it's a KFC or Nando's, basically the tool tells us, there's 5 times more money going to Nando's than KFC from existing shoppers, like that's your leasing sorted out. And so what we've done is, those tools we are now introducing, and we're cutting the stuff that generates reports. And we're just telling the teams to not waste their time. If there's an action, then go about it. But if it ends up in a report, don't bother.
I think data there's a science part to it and there's an art part to it. Science, there's a lot of it. It's all the data, it's the reports, it's the things that the very clever people can give you and bring you. But there's a reason why in property it is so powerful, and it's the art piece of it. It is the eyes of those that are not so deep in the science that look at that and go like, I see something there. I've made that connection. So I always believe that the best way to use data is to show it to as many people as possible in your organization. Because there are people that can see the relationships with data, that those that are deeply immersed in producing it completely miss. And there is such power in that use of it, and that is what drives real innovation. That's what's making companies different. That is what makes people different. And I think we also have a responsibility to look for that talent in our people. Some people can just see things better than others can, and that makes for those very unique customer experiences.
So maybe that brings us on to the next point, is the core skills and expertise within the REITs. And traditionally, REITs and asset owners weren't structured to think about tech and innovation, and great to hear that there is more of those skills and expertise coming on board, both at a management level as well as a board level. But that kind of begs the question now, is it the REIT's responsibility to do all that tech innovation, or do they partner with external third parties? Do they really have the bandwidth to be able to do something? And if they can do something meaningful for their portfolio, can they scale it given the competitive environment? And I know it's a bit more of a contentious question because everyone's got different views. So I'll start with Mike as the first REIT. Do you want to partner, or do you want to do it all yourself?
I think to an extent you need someone at the coalface internally, but that presents its own challenges. You know, once again, in a property business, it's much more difficult to convince the CFO that you need a business analyst than another leasing person, because another leasing person arguably is going to close your vacancy gap. You know, so arguing for these things that are non-tangible are slightly more difficult. But I think you need someone on the inside that understands your business well enough to move all the pieces around. But that being said, I think each working on its own is not going to produce meaningful results. And I think as an industry, we're facing a couple of challenges. And I think to overcome those challenges, you need a collaborative mindset. And you need to work well, whether it's within peers like us, or whether it's with outside parties, like providers of data, banks, insurance companies, whoever it might be. But then in a collaborative approach, trying to get to the end state much quicker to allow the entire industry to benefit.
I think it's a very boring answer from me of it depends. It depends on what type of technology we're talking about. I certainly feel that a core competence that we need to develop and that we will develop is our use of appropriate technology in customer insights. That for us is probably the most important area. So that's part of it where we want to own the insights piece, but the collection of the data could potentially be outsourced. So it really depends on what we're dealing about. But I do feel, and it comes back to an earlier point that I made, that I sort of see real estate evolving into more of an operating asset class, and therefore you've got to have a broader skill set than what a REIT of maybe 5 and 10 years ago had, which was really property, and a bit of finance thrown in. I think now you've got to bring in the marketing, you've got to bring in the IT, you've got to bring in the data analytics, because I think it's about running an end-to-end business. So really, I think in our space, it's about saying, what do we believe is mission critical to our vision? That's the customer piece. That's what we'll have in-house. Other pieces we may look to outsource, we may look to buy into other companies. Every opportunity needs to be evaluated on its merit.
Yeah, I think from an IP perspective, I mean, there's some things that give you competitive advantage, which, obviously you want to keep behind closed doors and keep within a certain brain of the business. And then there are other things that, where we've always been of the philosophy that at some point everyone's going to do it. So you've just got to be in a position where you do it better than everyone else. And there's massive benefit behind collaboration. I mean, for an example, we went through an experience on residential green building. About 10 years ago, we kicked it off in South Africa. And that was fairly insular to a line of business or group of companies that we worked with, but I mean, that has expanded across the whole residential sector. And what you've seen is huge improvement behind how you rate those buildings, what gets incorporated in terms of product tech, and so on, and so on. So, I think there's certain things that you have to share as an industry if you want to see improvement. There are a lot of people with different ideas, and I think if you're going to get to a concise answer of improvement, you need more input from various people. But there obviously are things which, you can keep to yourself at the end of the day.
I have two specific thoughts on it. One is, it's called Proptech for a reason. There's property and there's technology. So Laurence talked about the so what. I believe we keep the so what to property and the so why to the technical experts. We are not technical specialists, and there are people that can do it better. But in the end, there's a choice around capital, and that's my second point, is that we have been through a difficult time in this industry, and we have to make many, many trade-offs every day. Where do you get the best return on your capital? And I think as we make those trade-offs, we also have to think about the technology space. And a lot of the Proptech providers are small nimble firms, and that's why they are good. That is why they are bringing excellent solutions to the table, but they need capital. And I think that is where pooled capital by us is required to build those capabilities. And as you're saying, everyone's going to use it in the end. It's the so what that makes it unique for property companies. So I see that difference between keeping the so what for property and let the technical people deal with the so whys.
We've got about 5 minutes left, so before I ask any questions, are there any key questions from the audience? Is there any burning thing that anyone wants to know out here that you want to put forward to the panel at this point? I see one hand up down there. I don't know if there's a mic. Oh, no, yeah, sorry. Not enough mics.
Tell us a joke while we wait, Pete.
And luckily she's got the mic.
Hello. Good afternoon. Kamagolo Mwaneng from LLR. You know, there's a lot of talk about Proptech. But when I never really get, or what nobody really explains to us to get the buy-in, is one, what exactly do you mean by Proptech? Two, how has it improved your efficiencies? So if maybe two panelists can answer that for me, please.
All right, so if I understand the question correctly, and I think this goes to the whole kind of point of the panel and a lot of the discussion points, is that it's not Proptech for Proptech's sake. It's really as to what are the positive outcomes and benefits that Proptech can bring to bear for these companies. So maybe another way to position the question is, what is the blue sky, if we paint a picture of what Proptech can do and how it can digitize real estate, help to decarbonize it, make it really sexy, what are those Proptech 2.0, 3.0 ideas, blue sky things that you think may come in the next 5, 10 years for your assets?
I think it would be that you can have all the information at your fingertips, on your phone or whatever you use, at any point in time, in any form you need. But that's a massive ask. Yeah. And we have to take baby steps. We have to first use what we have, and we have to make sure that the things that we can connect and put together drive value for us, and in the end create some shareholder value, because if we can't do that, all this wonderful technology will not get us anywhere.
Peter, I would actually answer that question a very different way. It's not a question of what does the Proptech 2.0, 3.0, 4.0 look like. It's a question of what is the limit of your imagination as a real estate executive as to how you make yourself better. And when you know how you're going to get better, the question then is there technology that can enable me to get there? And I think that's where the symbiosis between real estate and tech has to come in, because you can have a situation of tech being delivered for tech's sake. It may not necessarily solve what you need, but if the real estate companies are actually promoting and saying, this is the vision of what I can do in my business, how I can drive better efficiencies, better knowledge, better returns for my shareholders, etc., can I find a technology provider to enable it? That is where that I think one needs to look at this problem.
From my perspective, of course, there's a lot of operational efficiencies, the ESG conversation that we didn't have today, but there's a lot of assistance on the technology side there. For me, it ends up in the customer experience. It'll end up in the hands of the user of that building. And I think today as landlords, maybe I'm unfair to all of us, but we control pretty much everything that happens in that building, and you as a tenant or a client is beholden to our decisions. And I think if I can sketch a blue sky picture in 15 years' time, it's that the users of the buildings actually have the power in that building. They can see anything, they can do anything that makes the experience better in that building. That'll be a fantastic end result in my view.
Maybe one kind of final question is just on the sustainability side, because that's a big challenge facing kind of the global real estate markets. You've got the C40 initiative in South Africa where they want all new builds to be net zero by 2030. The reality is the tech just doesn't exist. So how do you see technology as an enabler for making your buildings more sustainable? And are there any cool Proptechs that you're using in that regard, or any kind of key areas where you can see technology being beneficial?
So, Pete, I mean, I'm happy to kick off here. I think what's been quite interesting for us is there's obviously the asset side of it, so the product element of it, you know, what's getting incorporated into your properties, into your buildings. We've obviously spoken at length over the last few years about solar, all of those sorts of initiatives that come in. And as I kind of mentioned, you know, we've committed ourselves to this whole green housing certification process where we're effectively going to certify our entire portfolio. So what that means is that you've got a green building, you give back to tenants, and the way that we look at it is, you know, firstly, sustainability of utility, giving back to the affordable market in terms of a monetary saving to our tenant base as well, and also just satisfying their demand at the end of the day in terms of what they want. But I suppose when you look at ESG, it's a little bit broader than just the E, and I think the big solve is, well, what about the social impact side of it? And part of that commitment was always around satisfying the full sustainability consideration for the business. So for us, where data has become critically important around the tenant base, the people that live in our buildings, the where they come from, the whys, the where they work, you know, we've gone through quite a lengthy exercise in terms of almost quantifying the social impact element of it as well, because I think that is a big question mark in sustainability, and something that actually desperately needs to be solved for.
I think we're getting kicked off stage here, so I think that's going to be the end of it. But thank you very much to all the panelists. I think that was, you know, we touched quite lightly on a number of topics, and there's so much more which we can delve into, and there will be some more of that over the coming sessions, kind of more fast-tracked. So thank you very much for all the insights, and we look forward to all the adoption and all the great Proptechs that are going to kind of get generated out of this over the next couple of years to come. So thanks, everyone.